Father Vogel, we continue our series on St. Jean-Baptiste de La Salle's Meditations in Time of Retreat for Teachers. So we're in the 11th meditation, which is on the obligation of the brothers of the Christian schools, or of all teachers, or those instructing the youth, to reprove and correct the faults committed by those whom they have been given charge to instruct. So, about correcting the faults and sins of our children. So, the second point. People are naturally so inclined to sin that they seem to find no other pleasure than committing it. This is seen especially in children, because their minds have not developed yet, and they are not capable of much serious reflection. They seem to have no other inclination than to please their passions and their senses, and to satisfy their nature. So this is important thing to recognize, is that because of the fall, we are now inclined to sin more than to always do good. There is a selfishness within us. And so we see that within children especially. Remember when I was part of the Institute for Priestly Formation, they had us fill out what was your philosophy of life during certain stages. And when you're a young child, your early philosophy of life is basically subjective hedonism. I want what I want right now. I need to, whatever feeling or desire I have, it needs to be satisfied immediately. And so he's pointing out that this is really what's going on. There is a certain desire that a child has, and they want to satisfy that immediately. But we have to have them grow into virtue. So he'll continue. This is why the Holy Spirit says that it is as if folly is tied to the neck of children, and correction is the only way to cure them. The way to free the souls of children from hell, then, is to make use of this remedy, which will procure wisdom for them. Otherwise, if they are abandoned to their own will, they will run the risk of ruining themselves and causing much sorrow to their parents. The reason for this is because the faults turn into a habit, which will be very difficult to correct. The good and bad habits contracted in childhood and maintained over a period of time ordinarily become part of nature. So he's pointing out that what we're developing within childhood is going to have a continual consequence. Obviously, as a young child, they may not have the ability to reason through things, and so the faults, the selfishness that they may have is not going to be seen as a sin. They're not morally responsible if they're incapable of acting another way. But when you get older, if they've built in these bad selfish habits, sinful habits within them, then when they get older, they know right from wrong, and it will become, they will be responsible for it. And so that's why he says, it's kind of like a folly tied around their neck. If we don't help them learn that some of the actions that they're doing are not good, then when they're older, it could lead them far from God. So he says, that is why those who guide young children must reprove them, as St. Paul says, with all the force of authority, to make them return from their wandering and rescue them from the snares of the demon, who holds them captive to his will. In effect, it can be said with reason that a child who has acquired a habit of sin has in some sense lost his freedom, and has made himself a miserable captive, according to what Jesus Christ says, the one who commits sin is the slave of sin. So this is important to recognize, is that, yes, sin limits our freedom. Sometimes children, when we say no to certain things that they want immediately, they might feel that we are being mean, a mean mom or dad, or, a bad teacher, because you won't let me do what I want to do. Well, no, that's not the case. By correcting them, by reproving them, we are helping them attain a greater freedom, a freedom from always having to follow our immediate passions at that moment. And that is such a great good to be able to instill within children, so that when they're older, they can live in this greater freedom from just having to do exactly what our emotions and our desires would lead us to do. It is for you who are teachers of those you guide to take all possible care to bring those under your guidance into that liberty of the children of God, which Jesus Christ obtained for us by dying for us. To do this, you need to have two qualities in your relationship with Him. The first is gentleness and patience. The second is prudence in your reproofs and corrections. So, to think that when you have to correct a child, that you're doing so because you want to give them greater freedom as children of God. Freedom from having to follow their immediate response to things. So he says we need certain qualities to be able to do this. The first is gentleness and patience. So the way in which we're going to correct them, we want to correct a child being gentle with them and being patient with them. We don't want to get overly upset. And then also he says a prudence to your reproofs and corrections. So a certain prudence. What is truly going to help them to be able to change the way that they act? So we'll get more into the specifics of correcting, but probably a good resource that would get even more into the practical parts of this is St. John Baptiste de La Salle's Conduct for Christian Schools. That gets more into the kind of nitty-gritty as to how to go about correcting a child. God bless.